Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week, again doing some watercolor landscape painting. I think this is the second week in a row, which doesn't sound like much, but actually it's quite a bit for me this year. I haven't done as much watercolor painting as I did last year, but I'm trying to get back into it. This painting will be wet in wet painting. That's the usual way that I use watercolor paint. If you're new to watercolor, new to art, wet in wet, it just means, you maybe saw at the beginning of the video, I sprayed the paper with a little bit of clean water just to soak the surface of the paper. And the paint that I'm using, there's lots of water in the brush as well, so it's very wet paint going onto a wet surface, hence wet in wet. This style of painting, well, I guess in this video I can talk a little bit about wet in wet painting just for a minute or so. The other thing I wanted to talk about in this video was using abstraction. So if we get back to wet in wet first, the advantage of using wet in wet style of painting is you can bring out some of the unique qualities of watercolor paint. You get the effects that are sort of unique to this medium. You also get nice soft edges, and if you wet part of the paper but not other parts, you'll get a mixture of soft edges and hard edges, which can add some interest to your painting. And you can maybe see that on the blue horizon line that I put in. On the right hand side, it's quite hard edges, quite sharp edges, whereas towards the left hand side, where there was more water, the pigment moves out, it spreads out, and you get those softer edges. The downside, or at least for some people, the downside of wet in wet painting is you'll never have 100% control. Once that pigment hits the water, it will start to spread out, but exactly how it spreads out, how far and things, it's a bit of a mystery. So if you're happy enough with not being in complete control, wet in wet is a very enjoyable and very creative way of painting. It depends on your personality. If you want to be in complete control all of the time, wet in wet style painting might not be for you. But I definitely would recommend it. It does open up new possibilities. It gives you that sort of unique watercolor effects. It can introduce a bit of abstraction into your paintings. So this is what I wanted to talk about really in this video, was using abstraction in your paintings. So first of all, maybe need to define what I mean when I say abstraction. Like a lot of these phrases and the terminology in art, the definitions are a little bit fuzzy. So different people can have different ideas about what, for example, abstraction actually is. To me, abstraction is moving away from purely representational art. So it can still be representational, but it's not completely representational. Let me try and explain that. For example, some of the ways in which you can use abstraction is to simplify things. So if you're painting a tree, you don't paint every single leaf on the tree. You paint in blocks of colors and maybe little dabs of different values and things, different colors, just to suggest the foliage on the tree. And you let the viewer, most viewers know what a tree is, so they can fill in the details. They understand what it represents. So that's one way of using abstraction, just simplification. Another example might be exaggeration. Another example could be the use of color. Color doesn't have to be representational. So in this painting, yes, in the sky I'm using blue, and I'm allowing some of the white paper to shine through as well. So blue and white are colors that we would often associate with the sky, sort of local colors of the sky. The blue sky and the white clouds. But the land, so like I say, I drew in that, or painted in that horizon line using blue to represent sort of hedgerows and things like that. And you know, hedgerows, trees, that type of thing are not usually blue. And the grass, the landscape itself, I'm using cadmium yellow, a light cadmium yellow and a deep cadmium yellow, a sort of orangey color. Again, grass is not usually bright yellow or orange, but those are the colors that I like, and those are the colors that I use. And that's, you know, that's another type of abstraction. It's using non-representational colors for artistic reasons. And by artistic reasons, I might just mean I like those colors, so therefore I use them. Nothing complicated or anything. Once you accept that art doesn't have to be completely representational, once you accept that, you know, there's an artistic side to making art, then you open up all sorts of possibilities and you give yourself more freedom to be creative, to use color, to use simplification and so on in creative ways. And I think it's a very sort of liberating idea in art. So I guess main message is, you know, abstraction, it opens up possibilities. It can give you more freedom to be creative. It doesn't have to be a binary thing. It's not as though this art is representational and that art is abstract. You know, sometimes we think, or we hear people describing maybe something like a Jackson Pollock painting or a Picasso painting as abstract art, as if it's a sort of binary thing. Abstract art is that stuff over there. But I would say abstraction is something that you can introduce in smaller amounts or larger amounts into your painting style, just to give yourself a bit more creative freedom. Anyway, this is the final painting, or scan of the final painting. It is very loose. There's enough in there, I think, to suggest a landscape. So the viewer would look at it and see it as a landscape. Not everyone will, and not everyone will like it. And that's one of the things about using abstraction, is you are going to annoy some people. There are some people who just think that art must be completely representational. Any sort of weirdness, any sort of abstraction is just unnecessary, and they don't get it, they don't understand it. That's okay, because again, I think I make art for myself, I don't try to please other people. If other people like it, that's amazing, that's fantastic, but I'm making the art for myself. I'm doing what I want to do. So I don't worry too much if people criticize my art. Okay, well, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and hopefully see you again in next week's video.